All right. Well, everybody's here with the exception of Nooper, and including our guests. And so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:31. And it says I should do a roll call, but I've already said the only person who's missing of the 5 directors is Nooper. So I don't think we have to roll call. I'm Steve Weslowski, but let's do a roll call.
All right. Director Bajaj.
Present.
Director Chow. Director Racy.
Present.
Director Weslowski.
Here. Okay. Any public comment for items not on the agenda?
No.
Good. Thank you, public. Consent items. I'll move to approve our consent items so we can get through them. Who wants to second?
I'll second.
Who was that? All right. Any corrections to any of them? Kevin fixed the one error I found in the financial report. I put a minus where it belonged. So, anything to add to the manager's report, General Manager?
We found a supply of acid, so the pool will not shut down. It's just very disruptive to add it. That's all.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, with the reduced hours, that shouldn't be too bad. There are times of day when that can be done, where we have at least half an hour for it to recover. So, and I didn't see any corrections to the meeting minutes. Anyway, any more discussion on the consent items? If not, then I'll call the question and we will do a poll, since now I realize we have to roll call based on our presenters' overheads. So I vote for it. Kevin?
All right. Director Racy.
In favor.
Director Chow.
In favor.
Judge.
In favor.
All right. That's all 4 of us. One absent. All right, that moves us on to item 4, information discussion items. And I think that means I give up the I give the floor to Counsel Jerett. Yeah.
So I'm going to share
I
my
made it so you
screen.
could share your screen. So if you wanted to go ahead and share.
Okay. So, all right. Can everybody see my screen?
No.
Oh yeah, it's taking a while. It just says that you started screen sharing, but it's not showing your screen yet.
Okay. It's working on my screen, so maybe we can. Oh, my entire computer has frozen. That's not good.
All I see is black.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you.
Okay, so my computer seems to have frozen. Let's see if I can't do something to.
There it is.
Okay, let's try this one more time. So there's full screen and sharing. How we how are we doing? Working, not working?
Still just seeing your head.
All right, let's try it one more time. And if it's not working, then I think I've emailed all of the I've emailed everybody the packet, so we can just do it that way.
I also downloaded it, so I can put it up on the screen too, if that's helpful. You'll just have to tell me when to change slide.
Okay.
That might be faster.
Okay, let's try that. It says my screen sharing is paused for some reason, and it won't let me resume it. share. Kevin, why don't you try? I don't want to fiddle with this for too much longer. Yeah, it
Yeah,
keeps-
there you go. Yeah.
yeah, I keep saying that it's paused, and it won't let me unpause it.
Are you able to see it now?
I can see it.
Oh, okay. Can everybody see my screen?
No,
I can see it.
No, so at the
Yeah,
top,
okay.
if you click for everyone who's watching, if you click view options, I think you can. It says shared screens, and I'm able to pick between Kevin and Jerett. But Jared's screen is still not showing. I think Kevin, you just unshared.
Yeah,
Yeah,
on my screen it says that the sharing is paused, but it won't let me resume.
And it went away from my thing, but yeah.
Okay, no worries. I can put it on my screen if that's easier, and then just let me know when you want me to change.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I'm here to chat with you today about both the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. So I know that there are some of you who are old hands here and could probably give this presentation in your sleep, and others of you who are newer and still coming up to speed on the nuances of a kind of arcane set of statutes. So I'll try and keep this brief, but if there are questions, please feel free to stop me, and I'm happy to answer them as best I can. I guess next slide. Let's see. I'm not sure where the
Yeah, I think Jared,
presentation is.
if you unshare Jared, I think, or stop sharing from your end, I think that'll bring it up for you.
Okay, there we go. So I guess at a 10,000 foot level, the primary purpose of the Brown Act is the primary open government law that relates to local agency meetings. And in its most basic form, it states that all meetings of a legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the local agency, of the legislative body of the local agency, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. And I will unpack what those terms mean as we go along. A couple of things to keep in mind are that the Brown Act seeks to balance between the interest of the public in understanding just what its decision makers are doing, and the decision makers in having some reasonable amount of privacy to conduct agency business. So next slide. So I think the first big question is, what exactly is a legislative body? In its most basic form, a legislative body, this is the legislative body of the agency. It's when all of you get together to have a meeting and discuss the goings on of the agency. But there are a number of other entities that can be legislative bodies under the Brown Act. Two of the most notable are different types of committees that the board may form. So for example, a standing committee, like many agencies have a finance committee that meets on a regular basis to go over different financial matters, is a Brown Act committee, and certain types of ad hoc committees, which are committees that are formed for a particular, or temporary committees formed for a specific purpose, can also be Brown Act committees under certain circumstances. So I've provided in your materials just what some of those criteria are for ad hoc committees. I think we're not going to go over them tonight, but it's just for your reference. I think there's some pretty specific criteria you need to meet in order to be exempt. So I think one other thing that I wanted to highlight is that in some senses the Brown Act can seem arcane and bureaucratic. But compliance really is important. The public really does care about transparency amongst its public bodies, and I've included in the presentation interspersed just a handful of examples just from the headlines. A former colleague of mine used to give a similar presentation, and hers was entitled "Don't Become a Headline." So on the next page, This is an example just this past year from the city of Anaheim. They are in negotiations with the Angels about a new stadium. And in order to conduct those negotiations, the city council formed a negotiation team, which included the mayor amongst other staff. And there's ongoing litigation right now as to whether or not that constitutes a committee for the purposes of the Brown Act. These are the types of issues that do often end up in the news when the public feels like its representatives aren't acting appropriately. So next slide. So I think that begs the question of what constitutes a meeting. The legal definition is that a meeting is a gathering of the majority of the members of the legislative body to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item within the legislative body's subject matter jurisdiction. So in its most basic form, this is a meeting, and you've all come together to talk about different things within that relate to the district. A couple of important notes about this definition. To have a meeting, you need a majority. And to have a meeting, you don't need to actually take action. So I think the thought behind the Brown Act is that we want to avoid that stereotype of politicians in the smoke-filled rooms who are making all of their decisions outside of the public eye. We want to avoid things like all the board members having dinner the night before the meeting to hash out what they're going to do, such that the actual meeting is just kind of just kind of political theater. So I think there are, so we've talked about kind of a meeting in its most basic form. On the next slide, we talk a little bit more about some of the other types of things that can be meetings. Oh, so I guess I skipped a slide. So we can move on to the next slide. So I think this is another example. This is from a school district down in San Diego. There was a racist incident at a basketball game, and the well-intentioned trustees of the school board got together to try and put together a quick response to condemn the incident. But in doing so, I think that was a majority of the members, and how to respond to this racist incident is something that's within the jurisdiction of the school board. And so now they're getting a ton of public scrutiny for potentially violating the Brown Act. So next slide. So like I said, the kind of quintessential meeting is all of you getting together in a conference room to talk about things related to the district. But a definition of meeting is broader than that. It can include things like phone conferences, or it can include if you all go to happen to meet for dinner in the middle of the week, or it could be a series of emails. I think this is the one that's often hardest to grasp, that a meeting can be just a series of communications. Doesn't have to be people talking to one another. It doesn't even have to be all of you talking together at the same time. It can, if, for example, there's a contract that you might have to approve at the next, I guess, regular meeting, and one director reaches out to a couple of other directors to say, hey, I'm really not happy with this contract. Like, I really think that we need to fix some things before we approve it. That could be a meeting because it's a majority of the board who is deliberating on an issue within the board's jurisdiction. And another example of something that could be a meeting that, or that is, but that may not look like one, is if one director were to, if Director A says to Director B, like, hey, I'm really not happy about this contract. Why don't we change a couple of things about it? And then Director B reaches out to Director C and says, well, Director A and I, we have some concerns about this. Let's talk about this at the next meeting. And you have in that chain of emails or in that chain of conversations, had the majority of the board deliberating about an issue within the board's jurisdiction. So next slide. And that is what happened here with the Palomar Health District. I think this is also down in San Diego. I think they had a contract for, I think it was a union contract that was coming up for approval. The directors had a series of meetings outside of their normal regularly agendized meetings to discuss this contract, and now they're getting allegations of Brown Act violations. The Brown Act is a rapidly changing body of law. I think in the last few years, I think we've seen a lot more activity on social media. I think it's pretty common these days for public officials to be reaching out over Facebook and Nextdoor and Twitter, interacting with their constituents. And to some extent, a lot of this was never really contemplated when the Brown Act was written. And so just this past year, the legislature updated the Brown Act to clarify that some of these activities, like answering questions and providing information to constituents, which we really want to encourage, are not subject to the Brown Act. But once you have directors who are engaging with one another on social media, that could in fact be a Brown Act violation. So if a director posts something on Nextdoor or on Facebook to say that this resolution is going to do great things for the district, everybody should support it, and another director comments, responds to that post saying, I agree, this is such a great thing. And another director comments saying, but have we considered all of these potential drawbacks? I mean, that could be a meeting within the definition of the Brown Act. So next slide. So there are also a number of activities that are not meetings. I think that some of them most prominent would be conferences or events that are open to the public, attending meetings at other local agencies, or purely social or ceremonial events. For example, if you were all to be invited down to the Chamber of Commerce, if they do an annual gala or something like that, and they want their public representatives there, you could all go to that meeting, but you could not discuss any business that's within the subject matter of the district unless it's on as part of the scheduled program. So next slide. So what does it mean to be open in public? I think some of the big components of that are a noticed agenda, the right to comment, and access to documents. We'll talk a little bit about each of these. So the noticed agenda, I think, is the most significant. Next slide. I'm sure you've all seen agendas at this point. They need to be posted 72 hours in advance and include a brief but general description of each item of business to be transacted. And the idea here is that if I want to know what's going on at the district, I should know a couple of days in advance what's going to be discussed at that meeting, so I can tell, is this something that I want to come and attend and hear the discussion and potentially make my views known to the board. I think, and the corollary of that is that the board cannot take any action or discuss any item that does not appear on the posted agenda. So there are some I guess some caveats to this. So next slide. That if a member of the public brings up something, for example, the board can respond briefly to answer a question or to clarify something or to make an announcement. I think where this gets a little more gray is that often you're having a discussion about an important issue. Let's say that you have a policy that you want to adopt about the governance of the pool, and there are a lot of good ideas exchanged, and somebody says that, well, this is going to do such great things for the pool. well, we should do this for the playground as well. And if the agenda was only phrased to just to note discussions around policies for the pool, but not about the playground, then I think the appropriate thing to do would be to say, well, that's a really good point, but we should put that on our agenda for our meeting next month, and we can discuss it there so that the public is able to, so people who are interested in playgrounds but not pools have the ability to attend and to comment. So next slide. So this is how I think this is another, the Conejo Valley School Board got in trouble for just this, this type of a situation last month. I think there was a grand jury investigation that found that even though they hadn't intentionally tried to violate the Brown Act, they were having a discussion about an employee personnel matter, and it veered off into something else, and that was contrary to the Brown Act. So another component of being open in public is public comment. And so, and I'm sure as you've seen in your experience thus far, at meetings, we need to give the public the opportunity to address the board. There's typically a comment period for non-agendized items. I used to work for a city on the peninsula, and there's a woman who comes pretty much to every meeting and talks about how the fluoridating water is going to poison everybody in the city. And that's kind of the thing that she does. And similarly, prior to every action, we need to give the public the ability to comment on that action, so that the board can, so the public has the opportunity to express their opinions to the board about these matters that are within the board's jurisdiction. So there are a number of other rules around not putting up barriers to public comment. I think the board does have some ability to manage the meeting and direct when certain things, when the public can comment about certain things, but we can't put too many restrictions on the public's ability to address the board. Next slide. So I'm going to go through these last few a little more quickly. I think there are requirements for the location of the meeting. Just in general, the location of the meeting has to be accessible. There are a number of rules about teleconference meetings. Next slide. Right now, most of them are suspended because of the pandemic. There are a handful of special rules due to the pandemic, roll call votes being one of them. There's also discussion right now amongst advocates and amongst a lot of people in the local government field that, hey, we've been doing virtual meetings for a long time, and it works well for a lot of reasons, not only for convenience of the board, but there are a lot of people who they can't attend meetings during the day or in the evening because of their work schedule or their childcare situations. And having some easier ability to attend meetings and to offer public comment could be really beneficial to them as well. So I think we may see some changes coming to the Brown Act in this realm as as the pandemic subsides. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about public access to documents as part of the Public Records Act portion of this presentation, but just as in general, documents that are presented to the board at meetings need to be disclosed to the public. Next slide. The public has the ability to record the meetings subject to kind of some reasonable restrictions by the board. Next slide. And the public and agencies are obligated to record the different votes that are happening at the board meetings, just so that the next time the election rolls around, if the public is unhappy or happy with the way that its representatives are exercising their office, they're able to express that at the ballot box. So I think one kind of exception to a lot of the rules of the Brown Act is closed session. So there are a handful of very limited exceptions in which an agency can meet in closed session, which is essentially a private discussion amongst the board members and certain other persons. In general, these are situations where having these discussions in public could be embarrassing to individuals who have privacy interests, like in personnel matters, or could invalidate attorney-client privilege, such as litigation matters, or where having to have these discussions in public could compromise the agency's negotiating position, like in real estate negotiations and labor negotiations. So even so, the closed session makes the discussions confidential, but it does not make any decisions confidential. So at the end of a closed session, the agency needs to report out on any actions that were taken in closed session and the votes on those actions. So I think what happens when there are Brown Act violations, I think typically there is an opportunity to cure and correct. I think that's important to note. Some of these rules are complicated and nuanced, and the law tries to give the agency a chance to correct its violations. Though if an action taken by the board in violation of the Brown Act, such as a vote that on a matter that wasn't on the agenda, can be invalidated, and there are criminal penalties in more extreme cases for board members or public officials who violate the Brown Act. I think one thing that's important to note is that if the agency commits a Brown Act violation and loses a lawsuit, the plaintiffs are able to recover attorney's fees. So next slide. This is from the city of Lafayette just recently. They're paying well over $100,000 in attorney's fees to a plaintiff in a Brown Act action, and this is in addition to the money that they had to pay their own lawyers. This is not a big Brown Act. This is not a small fee award in a Brown Act violation. It's also not a big one. For larger cases, you can see attorney's fees awards in the order of several $100,000. So Brown Act violations can be quite costly to an agency if all goes poorly. So I think now we're moving. So I guess maybe I should pause for questions before we move on to the Public Records Act. Okay, hearing none. So we'll move through the Public Records Act a little bit more quickly. So similar to the Brown Act, the Public Records Act is a transparency statute. In its most basic form, it states that except where exempt, each local agency needs to make records promptly available to any person that requests them upon payment of any fees. And similar to the Brown Act, you see a balancing of interests between the public's right to obtain records and to see the goings on of agencies, and the right of agencies to conduct their business with some amount of privacy. Next slide. So I think the big question here is, what is a public record? And so a public record is any writing that is containing information relating to the conduct of the agency's business, prepared, used, owned, or retained by any state or local agency, regardless of any physical form or characteristic. So as you can see, this definition is very broad. So a writing, next slide, can be a written memo, but it can also be an electronic communication like an email. It can be a tweet. It can be a map, like a picture, a chart, a photo. So the definition of writing is very broad. Next slide. I think one big issue that's come up recently is text and emails on personal accounts or devices. And the California Supreme Court ruled a few years ago that these messages are subject to the Brown Act. I'm sorry, just the Public Records Act. So if you are using your personal email for to conduct agency business, I think it's always good to segregate those emails as best you can. So I for example, I am so I live in Oakland and I'm on a local commission, and if I'm using I want to prefer to use my city email, but to the extent that I'm using my personal email, I make sure to forward everything to the city email, because if a Public Records Act request ever comes in for my records, I don't want to go searching through my personal email to look for records that where I was emailing about commission business. So next slide. So I think it's also important to note what is not a record or what is not within the scope of the Public Records Act. So if the agency doesn't have the record that's requested, you're not obligated to create or obtain it. So for example, if the requester were to ask for a list of all the contracts the agency has entered into in the last year, you might know their response might be, well, we don't have a list, but here are copies of all the contracts. Or if they asked for all the documents from a certain action in 1990, the response might be, well, we deleted those, we destroyed all those records in accordance with our retention policy, and we just don't have them. And that's really the end of the story. It's a record production statute, not a record retention statute. Next slide. There are a number of exemptions to Public Records Act requests. It's pretty typical if you get one that is anything but the most plain vanilla request to run the records that are produced by counsel to make sure that we're not waiving any privileges or producing any records that we shouldn't be producing. I think next slide. So here's some examples of some of the exemptions. I don't know if there are certain records that are where disclosure is barred by statute, such as by privacy statutes. Next slide. So the Public Records Act provides pretty broad leeway to members of the public to request documents. You often get unsuccessful bidders for public contracts trying to get records from the copies of their competitors' bids, or you get people asking for random emails from the public employees. There are no rules about having or no limits on why you can reduce or why you can request records. Any reason or no reason at all, you can request records. Next slide. So I think this is just a quick overview about how the agency responds to the request. We don't really need to spend too much time on this, but the agency has an obligation to help the requesters identify the records they're looking for. The agency is obligated to respond within a certain period of time to inform the requester whether any responsive documents exist. And the agency must make a reasonable search for the records. So we don't have to go to the ends of the earth to find that memo that somebody misfiled in 1972. But we need to check and see, is it in all the usual places where one would keep a memo from 1972? So and once we've identified a non-exempt record, it needs to be promptly provided to the requester. Next slide. So again, remedies for violation. I think the big one is that if you violate the Public Records Act request and get sued, not only does the requester get the record, but the requester can get attorney's fees. And like we saw for the Brown Act, this can get up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in more significant cases. So it is important not only for our transparency purposes, but because it can be frankly expensive to make mistakes with regard to the Public Records Act. So next slide. So just two thoughts in closing. One is that we are here kind of as custodians of the public trust, and it is important for these types of public transparency statutes that we not only conduct ourselves within the letter of the law, but be perceived to be an organization that is above board and transparent and accountable to the public. I think the last thing we want is to win the public record, to win the Brown Act lawsuit, but have everybody go away thinking, well, if this is the stuff, the kind of things they're doing, what else are they doing that we're not that we haven't heard about? And to that end, I think that the last point is that your counsel is here to walk you through some of these more arcane and nuanced statutes that are constantly evolving. So if you have questions about can we hold this kind of a meeting, can I attend this conference? If I create this kind of record, am I going to have to disclose it? I think maybe the best way for your counsel is here to walk or to advise you on just those types of issues. And maybe the best way, Kevin, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but would be to direct your questions to Kevin, and as appropriate, Kevin can forward those to counsel, and we can provide you with guidance to not only stay within the lines, but just to terms of just what best practices are by other public agencies. So I think next slide. So I guess I'll open it up one last time for questions. All right, well, hearing none, if anything else comes up, please feel free. Like I said, we are here to help you navigate these kind of strange and ever-changing laws, and yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. No questions? All right. Next time. And again, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Moving on to the next item B, discussion regarding return to in-person meetings due to the anticipated expiration of the EO. That would have been the only question I would have for district council is there a possibility that closed meetings will continue, or excuse me, Zoom meetings will continue, but he probably doesn't know.
Yeah, so I think, like I mentioned before, I think there's a lot of interest in reforming the public or the Brown Act to allow for more ability for remote meetings, even as we come out of COVID. There's nothing that's on the table right now because we are still under the executive order. But I think there's definitely been a lot of discussion amongst public agency folks about. A lot of folks are seeing that they're getting a lot more participation at meetings, especially those that are during the day, because there are just so many more ways for the public to participate. And I think that's something that there's a lot of interest in continuing once the pandemic subsides, but there's nothing currently on the table.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I'm sure you would hear, you know.
Yes, and as stuff does develop, we will keep you posted.
I'm sorry, what was your last sentence?
Oh, as the law changes in this regard, we will keep you posted.
All right, because I agree. It has, in at least one other meeting that I attend, it's opened it up to a lot more people coming because attending and being aware of the meeting. So it has its positive aspects besides not spreading the virus. So, all right, well, thanks for the answer to that question. Okay, Kevin, I'm going to let you take over for in-person meetings. As far as other than to state that it looks like, given current time frame of September 30th for the end of virtual meetings, it will be our October meeting. Will be our first meeting we'll hold at the at our usual place of business, the conference room or the room at the district. Say what you got to say.
All right, so as of right now, the order that allows us to do remote meetings is set to expire on September 30th, which means that a regular October meeting will be in person. Now, that being said, Delta variant is kind of gaining steam, so anything can happen between now and then. But what staff needs to know here is whether whether some of our directors will be needing to join remotely. If that is the case, we can totally do that. We just need to make sure that 3 directors are in person, and the remaining 2 will just have some noticing requirements. So we'll have to post the agenda on dorm room or wherever it's gonna go, and then open the door and let you know, all of those interested parties come in and provide public comment on a park district that's out of state. So if this is going to happen, that's totally fine. We can do it. We just need to know if there's a desire to do this, and if yes, we'll take care of it. That's about it. Does anyone have any questions?
Cool, and Misha, you 2 are the ones I'm most worried are going to have to attend remotely. So that means the other 3 of us, of which there's only 2 tonight, have to show up.
Yes, yeah, definitely would require something like this for maybe not every month or anything like that, but at least a few months in the year.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So if Nicole and I are both present, but one person isn't present, like in person, that means we can't have a meeting even though we technically have a quorum?
Yeah, that's correct. Now, what we can do is we can actually just cancel the meeting, the regular meeting, and then call a special meeting with the same agenda, just correct the dates and then move it out. It's not a problem. We don't normally do that, but we can do that. So I think what this means is we just have to coordinate a little bit more, but other than that, no problem. And who knows, maybe this, maybe the health order will be extended. I know that there's, you know, there is some talk, of course, about you know, bringing the Brown Act into the 21st century with Zoom meetings. So we'll see. Maybe some legislation in the next year or 2.
Yeah, but for the purposes of meeting in October, it would have to be in the next 2 months, and that's pushing it. You know, we'll see. You know, but yeah, I'm afraid we're going to have some rescheduled meetings. You know.
That's all right. So I will go ahead and get started on getting the hardware for that. Does everyone have the hardware to do this remotely? Like, do you have webcams? If not, I can go ahead and start purchasing those as well.
See, so is there any on our end, like, you know, I have a built-in webcam, but there's nothing else, I guess, other than are the mics also then required for us to purchase, or?
No, you would not have to purchase it. I can purchase it for you. So
Yeah.
yeah, so just go ahead and reach out to me if you need hardware, and I'll get you something. These webcams are great. Just a little USB, you can pop it in. That
Right.
works just fine. So just anyone who needs it, reach out to me, and I'll get you the hardware.
Okay. But so like the built-in microphone is something I can't use. Like I have to accept basically additional hardware from you. Is that, like, am I reading that correctly?
No.
If you have your own hardware, that's totally fine.
Okay.
But if you want hardware, or if you're like, you know, let's say that your setup, the camera works, but your microphone's not good, then I can get you a microphone. So
Got it. Okay. Yeah. No, I think I'm good as is.
Yeah. I mean, so long as you'll have access to this, pretty much the same hardware you're using for tonight's meeting, you should be okay. Because I can hear you, I can hear Misha, I can hear Kevin, you know. So, Chow and Kevin Davis. And you guys can hear me since I learned to speak up. So anyway. So, all right, well, like Kevin Davis said, if you need any other hardware, let him know so I can get it in time for the October meeting. You know, like I say, we'll see how this goes. Anything else, Kevin?
No, that's it.
All right. Then let's see, 716. New board policies, amendment to policy 3000 and a new board policy 3020, which you scroll down to that. Yeah. This dates back to last meeting, when we discussed this with the 3 board members that were there, the fact that we need to, at some point, get Kevin to be a signatory on the bank account, among other things. Because otherwise, when I leave the board after next year, who's going to sign? Especially if 2 board members happen to be out of the area. It's hard to sign checks, and checks need to be signed. I did 30 this week, so anyway. So Kevin, I'll let you questions, because you were the one who came up with the new policy, which we can't, I guess we have to have it at 2 different meetings in order to pass it, 2020. So this is the first reading of it. Go ahead. And I think the way I read 30,000 and 3020, the changes to 3,000 and 3020 is it looks like basically you'll be able to cover almost everything.
Yeah, that's correct. So currently the way it works is that any outgoing monies will need to have a board member sign. However, a lot of people pay by check, especially because our swim lessons tend to be a little bit more expensive. So it's kind of unreasonable to come in with a couple $100. So a lot of people just pay by check. And then if you cancel, then that goes back as a check. And so and increasingly we're using deposits for things like swim camp or hall rentals, things like that, and those need to be returned by check. But these are all sort of mundane sort of things to get signed, and so they're not really controversial. There's a very rigorous paper trail. It gets audited, and so what this policy does is it specifies that yes, the general manager can sign first for certain things, and then this is actually fleshed out in more policies that are either in this later in the agenda or coming. I'll just flip to it. So this is a proposed one that actually states what those items are that the general manager would be able to sign. But what this will do is it'll take a little bit of the pressure on board members to come in and sign all the time. It'll take it off of directors and put it onto me. And it also lets us be a little bit faster and more flexible with making payments. So if, let's say a bill comes late and then we make a check, we don't have to call Steve and have him come in on short notice to get it done. Now, one of the side consequences of this is that some of the oversight that the board does will have to be a lot more rigorous. And so one of the other recommendations that came out last month was that maybe at some point in the year, we create an ad hoc committee that would look at how we're looking at things, what the reports are, and making sure that that's sufficient to provide oversight. But I think that since we're doing a bunch of these policies and a bunch of different changes, it might make more sense to do that committee sometime later in the year. In any case, so this is the first reading of these 2 policies. So, definitely be a good idea to take a look at it. If you have any questions, go ahead and you can ask me about it, and then it won't be acted on until next month. Does anyone have any questions right now about either the signing authority or the expense authorization?
No? All right. So next month we'll have them again and pass them unless somebody comes up with a correction between now and then. Correct, Kevin? All right, discussion and action items. Updating the district bylaws. I gotta admit, reading the district bylaws was an eye-opener. I hadn't looked at them in a while. And I think Kevin's recommendation to update the bylaws using policies for approval at a future meeting is a great idea, because when I read the bylaws, I recognized, yeah, we haven't been conducting our business according to them in a while. By the strict letter of the law. So they conflict with with the policies that we've adopted in the last year, as he pointed out, adopted in the last year or so. And the policies make a hell of a lot more sense in today's climate. You know, but that comes of having bylaws be documents that are now 30 years old, you know, with no changes. Kevin, what do you want to add to that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. The bylaws are out of date, and they could not be updated last year when there was 3 board members, because it takes 4 directors to update the bylaws. That's why we're doing it now instead of last year when those policies were made. That being said, those policies, I think it's Series 4000, and those are generally what would normally be the bylaws. Bylaws are typically they're essentially policies that govern how the board governs itself. And we already have policies for that. So I think it just makes sense to try to move those into the bylaws. And there's going to need to be a few updates because there's a few additional sections. But by and large, I think we can do that. And I just wanted to see if the board had a preference on how to do it, because these are the board's bylaws, not staff. So the first option, of course, is to move 4100 into the bylaws and then take 4100 and take it out of the policies. That way you don't have it in 2 different places. And the second one, of course, is just to take the whole bylaws and say, see, you know, policy 4100, see policy 4105, something like that. Option 2 is faster, but it's a little bit more confusing, I guess.
So how many policies are there that you'd have to move into the bylaws? Like just a number? You said it's the entire 4000 series?
Yes, yeah, it's the entire 4000 series.
Okay.
So it's more or less the entire 4000 series. There's a few pieces of the 1000 series in there as well, and some parts of the introduction. So it typically has, you know, what kind of powers the board has, what are the officers of the board, how does the board meetings run, are we using Robert's rules or Rosenberg, things like that. They're all already stated, so I think it's just a matter of putting it in the right place.
What's the major downside to going option 2, because it is faster and easier, is to basically change bylaws to reference board policies?
It's more of a long-term thing. What happens is then, let's say that we change something in the policies. Let's say one of the policies, we're kind of reordering it to make it a little bit more readable. You know, sometimes we want to have one policy right after the next one, so it references it. So if we change that 10 years down the line, then sometimes maybe the bylaws isn't updated at the same time. So if the bylaws referencing, let's say 4100, and then 4100 10 years down the line becomes 4130, right? Something like that, then that gets out of date. So the longer you go, whenever you start referencing, there's always a chance that that link is going to be broken and nobody's going to catch it.
Okay, so that's why you think option 1 is preferable, because it doesn't duplicate anything. It eliminates duplications.
Right. No duplication, no links, nothing like that. It's all original documentation. So any changes would be right into the bylaws. And I think that's the cleanest, best. Takes a little bit more work, but I think it's worth it.
Okay. Then all right. I'd move to approve option 1 then.
Second.
Any more discussion on this?
I don't know that we need to take action on it. It's just direction to me, because I have to present a proposal and then, you know. So,
Yeah.
So
I would say I'm for option 1, largely just because I feel like if you're going to do it, you should do it right. And like you're saying, it's you know, it's not even like it's something that's still doable, right? It's not like it's a huge project or anything. So making sure that it lasts for the long run, where, you know, it's less complex and it's easier to understand would be the best option in my opinion. But yeah.
Agreed. You've stated it well. Misha's nodding her head. I can't see Kevin Chow, but I assume he's nodding his head too. Are you, Kevin?
I agree as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, then it looks like, it looks like we're in agreement. Go for it, Kevin Davis. And it'll take a while, but yeah, it's like I say, when I reread the bylaws, which I hadn't done in a while, I go, my God, things were a lot simpler 20 some odd years ago when we last did this, 28, almost 30 years ago. And a lot of water's been under the bridge. And that's why I'm glad we went through the policies and have tightened them up to cover more things. So, okay, so discussion of staff planning a future board meeting for board member orientation. I told Kevin, I'm not sure how well this is going to work out. It's hard enough to get us together for a meeting. This is the second meeting we haven't had, all 5 of us, It would be nice to do, but I think another way to look at it is at the October board meeting, there should be at least 3 of us together if we've got any questions, because a lot of this was Q&A. A lot of reason behind this wasn't just to get a free lunch or something like that. It was to look around, see if you had any questions, and see if we could get answers to them. So given everybody's busyness in their lives, it seems like maybe we should forget it. Kevin Davis, what do you say?
Yeah, there was a bit of difficulty in the scheduling. I think the thing that staff was kind of worried about here was that with the Delta variant, it may no longer, I think that window may have shut. We can still, I think food is probably just off the table. We could potentially still do a meeting and a tour. It's kind of helpful to see some of the places that I talk about in the manager's report, pump room, see how everything works, office, electrical room, and it kind of gives a better idea of the facility, so that way when I'm talking about certain things, you can kind of be like, oh, that thing. It would be great to do it at some point, but I think we may need to kind of regroup on this one, and I want to get the board's thoughts.
Yeah, in fact, it jumped out at me when Kevin Chow, I was signing checks and he popped into the office in the back where Kevin is when he's in the office, and Sonny is, and he says, oh, I've never been back here. And I go, you're right, the electrical room. How many people haven't been in the electrical room just to see what it is, So I think trying to allot time for a 30-minute tour, or maybe that's too much time, at the end of the meeting in October is the best thing to do. Since we're going to be there, take a quick look around so you can picture what you're talking about. That's the hardest part. I mean, I've been in every, over the years, I've been in every part of the building, and I think stepped on every part of the acreage. So I can mainly picture what's where, but still, you're in charge of this, so it's better to have a picture in your mind when you're making a decision. So, all right. So we'll try that. See if we can do a little tour in October. Okay, Kevin?
Some of our directors may not be there in October, though.
I know, that's the problem I see. So, I was going to say to Nicole and Misha, if you get a chance to get in there for half an hour or so and look around, if you can coordinate that with Kevin, especially, that'd be a good idea. You'll have a better appreciation.
Yeah, there's coincidentally like a 50-50 chance that I'm in person during our board meeting for October. I was just checking before this meeting, so I'll try to make that happen. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And but yeah, try and make a point to look around, and even if Kevin wasn't there and somebody was if there were more than one person in the office, if it was during a time when we're staffed, for swim team lessons or something like that, you could say, hey, I'm a board member, can you show me around real quick? But it'd be better to schedule that in advance, probably, Kevin, because everybody's busy when they're there. All right.
Everyone has a very specific role while they're there, so they may not be able to.
Yeah. I take that idea back. Yeah, you're right. All right. Item C, support Assembly Bill 361. I got informed of this, and Kevin found the description of it. I thought we could support this, but it looks like when I reread it, that 361 would allow video conferencing during a governor declared emergency that makes meeting in person unsafe, like we're all on fire or something like that. I finally realized this isn't necessarily a carry forward, but like I said a few minutes ago, that more people have shown up for the Santa Clara County Special Districts Association meetings, for instance, now that since they have been on Zoom, and so getting a quorum is better, and for our meetings, getting a quorum is better. So if nobody has an objection, we could Kevin could send an email off saying, hey, we support this. The idea of being able to have open meetings but online. Does anyone have any objection to that?
No, I also like the fact that, it really only has to happen if there's an issue with meeting in person, right? So that we kind of have the option to do that if it's not, or if we're all able to. So yeah, I'm definitely in support.
Misha, Kevin Chow.
Support as well.
Yeah, Misha.
I support it as well. I think
Okay.
it's necessary, especially given the previous conversation we had. So I don't see a reason not to support it.
All right. Well, then, Kevin, if you can send an email up to the place where at the bottom where it says send an email, say we support it. Rancho Rinconada Recreation and Park District. And because I think it's a good idea. We'll see what happens. October is going to be interesting, and thereafter. So, well, after
This is a formal motion, right, of support. So we would want to have a motion and a second on that one.
I'll make the motion. Who wants to second?
A second.
Any more discussion? All right, then, polling me first, I agree.
All right, Director Chow,
Agree.
Director Racy,
I'm in favor of it.
Director Bajaj.
In favor.
All right, thank you. That looks like it's adjournment time, except another thing about this public records meeting thing is there anything short, hopefully short, you have to say, Jenny, because you've been good about being quiet at our meetings.
Thank you, Director Wesolowski.
Yeah.
Did I say your last name correctly? Okay. No, you guys are just awesome. I know how difficult this is with the Zoom meetings and having to put masks on and not put masks on and trying to figure out where you're going. And like if you go off to school, how can I join this meeting? And I think we're all a lot smarter about the Zoom software since we've gone through this. But no, you guys are just, it's really, really great to see people working so hard to try to keep the Zoom meetings going and under these very, very difficult circumstances. And it's interesting to see whether that September 30th mandate by the governor will be changed, because I understand the Delta thing is just gone viral. So I'm sorry, that's a bad word. I'm hoping that things will calm down, but it is what it is.
It's
Thank
beyond
you.
control. Yeah. So let me ask another question real quick, since we did have I forgot to ask it when we were talking about, when we come to meet together, I'm fully vaccinated. Are the rest of our board members who are in attendance tonight fully vaccinated? No, you can nod your head. Yep. And so is Kevin.
Yep.
And
I'm vaccinated. So I'm vaccinated.
So we shouldn't have a problem in terms of if we have to share a machine getting near each other. So, all right. It just occurred to me I could ask that question. Then I guess I can adjourn at 7:36 unless there's anything else that's on the agenda in some way, shape, or form. And I want to say one thing after we adjourn really quick. So, all right, then we're adjourned at 7:36.